name is Frances O'Donnell, and I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at Auburn University. My presentation provides an overview of our project studying the role of geographically isolated wetlands in improving water quality in agricultural landscapes on the Dougherty Plain of southwestern Georgia. The project is a partnership between Auburn University and the Jones Center at Itchaway, with funding from the USDA through the National Institute of Food and Agriculture. My collaborators are Matthew Waters, an associate professor in the Department of Crop, Soil, and Environmental Science at Auburn. Stephen Brantley and Stephen Galladay are scientists at the Jones Center, and Coleman Berry and Chloe Eggert are Auburn graduate students. They are both giving presentations at this conference that provide more technical detail on aspects of the project. Wetlands provide a range of ecosystem services that benefit humans and wildlife. Wetland vegetation and bacteria in wetland sediments break down contaminants, improving water quality between the runoff received by the wetland and the water released from the wetland. This is especially important in agricultural regions. Fertilizers containing nitrogen and phosphorus are key to agricultural productivity, but may run off of fields during heavy rains. Nitrate pollution can make surface and groundwater resources unsafe to drink, while phosphorus pollution leads to algal blooms that harm wildlife, recreational sites, and commercial fisheries in downstream waters. The conservation and restoration of riparian wetland buffers is a common strategy for protecting water quality in streams and rivers that drain agricultural lands. In recognition of their important role in protecting water quality, wetlands that are connected to streams and rivers are generally protected under federal law by the Clean Water Act, though these regulations have recently been in flux. Not all wetlands have direct connections to surface water. The role of these isolated wetlands in improving water quality has not been extensively studied. Geographically isolated wetlands, or GIWs, are wetlands that are completely surrounded by upland vegetation and soils. They lack a consistent connection to surface water. While GIWs may be geographically isolated, most still maintain hydrological and chemical connectivity to other water bodies and groundwater aquifers through below-ground flow paths and surface flow paths that form during very wet periods. GIWs are common in regions with karst geology, including parts of Georgia. In a karst landscape, sections of bedrock have dissolved, creating fractures, caves, and sinkholes. These areas typically have plentiful groundwater resources, but are also vulnerable to groundwater contamination due to the direct connections between surface water and groundwater in fractured bedrock. The sinkholes and depressions that form as a result of this fracturing are where GIWs form. As water drains into these depressions over time, a dense layer of clay and silt with low permeability may accumulate. This leads to a stronger connection between the GIW and the surface water system by preventing percolation into groundwater. While some GIWs are surrounded by conserved or protected forest lands, many are embedded in or adjacent to working farms. They span a continuum from small depressions that are heavily impacted by farming operations to large areas of open water surrounded by wetland vegetation. We hypothesize that healthy agricultural wetlands improve water quality by processing and storing nitrogen and phosphorus and provide other ecosystem services. GIWs are points on the landscape that are typically waterlogged and of marginal agricultural productivity. Therefore, we also hypothesize that protecting and restoring agricultural GIWs will have minimal impact on crop yields. Our study area is the Dougherty Plain physiographic district of the coastal plain of Georgia, which is characterized by numerous GIWs and relatively few streams or rivers. The density of GIWs is among the highest in the southeastern U.S. Intensive agriculture came to the region in the 1970s with the development of the Upper Floridian aquifer for irrigation. Irrigation is the largest reason for groundwater withdrawals in Georgia, with the majority occurring in the Dougherty Plain district. With intensification of agriculture came concerns about groundwater and surface water contamination. Instances of nitrate contamination of Upper Floridian wells that supply drinking water have been reported, and an increasing trend in nitrate concentrations in springs discharging into the Flint River is shown here. Our study sites are in the Itchaway-Notchaway Creek Basin. They include forested wetlands at the Jones Center at Itchaway and agricultural wetlands on working farms. Our first research objective is to understand how nutrients move from the upland, which may be farmland, forest, or a mix of the two, to the wetland. First, we are studying the spatial distribution of nutrients in the upland and how it is influenced by factors like land cover, slope, and distance from the wetland by collecting soil samples throughout the drainage area of each wetland. We will analyze these samples both for the content of nitrogen and phosphorus and for the content of trace elements that, when detected in the wetland, will help us determine which areas of the watershed are contributing the most sediment to the wetland through a process called sediment fingerprinting. Water drives most transport of nutrients from the upland to the wetland, so it is necessary to understand the hydrology of the system. We installed a rain gauge at each site and monitoring wells that measure water level in the wetlands. Nitrogen and phosphorus both have several chemical forms. Some bind to soil particles and can be transported to the wetland through erosion and sedimentation. To measure this, we are collecting wetland sediments that accumulated recently using sediment traps installed in the wetlands and by taking samples from the surface of the wetland sediment. Some forms of nitrogen and phosphorus dissolve and are transported to the wetland with the flow of water. To measure this, we are regularly collecting water samples from the wetlands for water quality measurements. The purpose of this data set is to develop, calibrate, and validate a model of the system that can be used to mechanistically understand its function and predict its behavior under a broad range of conditions. If you'd like to hear more about this aspect of the project in detail, please check out the presentation by Coleman Barry that is also a part of the Georgia Water Resources Conference. While our first objective addresses the spatial distribution of nutrients and sediment, our second objective addresses temporal dynamics. We are studying how the capability of wetlands to store and process nutrients and sediment has changed over the decades since the expansion of agriculture in the Dougherty Plain. We are doing this for two reasons. First, wetland conditions vary substantially between wet years and dry years. These two photos show the same wetland in the same month of different years. It is highly unlikely that we will observe the full range of conditions the wetlands experience within a 3-year project. This long-term analysis will help us understand how climate impacts GIWs. The second reason for long-term analysis is the effect of legacy nutrients. Soils gradually absorb nitrogen and phosphorus for years after a landscape is converted to agriculture. If the farmland is abandoned, these nutrients will be gradually released back into the environment, again over years to decades. Land cover on the Dougherty Plain has been dynamic, as shown here, with the mix of forest and unirrigated agriculture shifting towards irrigated agriculture. Understanding the effect of these landscape legacies on nutrient input rates to the wetlands requires a decadal-scale approach. To do this, we collect a core sample from the wetland sediments that have gradually accumulated over tens to hundreds of years. The relationship between the depth in the core and the age of the sediment can be determined by radiometric dating. By analyzing the sediment at different depths, we hope to determine the rate of sediment input, the rate of nutrient input, and the rate of nutrient processing throughout the history of each wetland. If you would like to hear about this aspect of the project in more detail, please check out the presentation by Chloe Eggert that is also part of the Georgia Water Resources Conference. Our final objective is to work with landowners and other agricultural stakeholders to identify strategies for protecting or improving the ecosystem services provided by GIWs that are compatible with agricultural production. We are currently working with 2 landowners who have provided access to research sites. These sites represent a range of impacts that agriculture may have on a GIW. Some are fully embedded in farm fields, with nearly all of their drainage area cultivated. The smallest wetlands in this group are farmed over in dry years. Others are adjacent to farms with a mix of cropland and forest in their drainage area. We're also studying some differences between wetlands that may affect their function and could offer clues as to which management actions would be beneficial. Wetlands such as the one shown here have a well-developed buffer of native vegetation growing around them, while others are plowed very close to the wetland edge. We will compare these wetlands to determine if maintaining a vegetated buffer improves wetland function. Two of the wetlands we are studying have berms constructed in the wetland to allow the passage of an irrigation pivot or a road. This is shown by the green lines passing through this wetland. It represents a substantial disturbance that may be unavoidable. One of these wetlands has a culvert installed in the berm. We will determine if the increased connectivity created by a culvert improves wetland function. Unfortunately, our ability to work directly with stakeholders has been slowed by the COVID-19 pandemic. In future project years, we plan to work with the Flint River Soil and Water Conservation District to reach a broader group of agricultural resources professionals, farmers, and rural community members. As we work with our stakeholder group to share perceptions and knowledge, we are producing a short video to document the process of discovering the presence and value of GIWs on working farms. Finally, we have some acknowledgements shown in front of the wetland we lovingly refer to as Skunky Pond. These include our funding source, the landowners who have provided access to their agricultural wetlands, and a number of folks who have provided invaluable assistance with fieldwork and logistics as we got this project off the ground. Thank you for virtually attending my presentation. If you have any questions or you see opportunities to collaborate or connect, please don't hesitate to reach out at the email address below.